Understanding transphobia in educational systems. In today's world, where education is meant to be a safe haven for growth, discovery, and identity formation, many transgender students find themselves facing an invisible but deeply rooted threat: transphobia. Far more than just individual prejudice, transphobia in educational systems is a systemic issue that affects not only how transgender students learn, but also how they exist within school walls. At its core, transphobia refers to the irrational fear, hatred, or mistrust of transgender people. In schools, this can manifest in countless ways, ranging from intentional misgendering and lack of inclusive curricula to discriminatory bathroom policies, exclusion from sports teams, and even outright bullying from peers and staff. It's not just a matter of discomfort, it's a matter of mental health, academic performance, and, in many tragic cases, survival. Research shows that transgender students face significantly higher rates of harassment, absenteeism, and dropout compared to their cisgender peers. According to a 2023 GLCN National School Climate Survey, over 75% of transgender students reported feeling unsafe at school because of their gender identity. More than half experienced verbal harassment, and nearly 1 in 4 face physical assault. These aren't just numbers. They're indicators of a crisis that too often goes ignored. Beyond the data are the real, human experiences that give voice to this crisis. Like Alex, a high school sophomore who was denied the right to use the boys' restroom and instead told to use the nurse's office. A humiliating and alienating experience that made him avoid school altogether. Or Maya, a non-binary student whose teacher refused to use their chosen pronouns, undermining their identity in front of the entire class. These stories are not rare. They echo across countries, cultures, and classrooms, highlighting how institutional bias and lack of understanding strip transgender youth of their dignity and safety. It's essential to remember that education is not just about grades and exams. It's about fostering environments where every student, regardless of gender identity, feels seen, respected, and supported. And yet, for many trans students, school becomes a battlefield instead of a sanctuary. When institutions fail to take a stand, whether through inadequate policies, lack of staff training, or silence in the face of discrimination, they become complicit in that harm. This video aims to unpack these realities, not to spread fear or blame, but to bring awareness, empathy, and urgency to the conversation. Because understanding transphobia isn't just an academic exercise, it's a step toward justice. We must begin by listening, learning, and challenging the norms that have too long excluded and erased transgender lives in education. Only then can we start to transform our schools into places where all students, regardless of who they are, can truly thrive. The impact on transgender students. Transgender students across the globe face challenges that often go unseen, yet deeply affect their everyday lives, especially in schools. One of the most pressing issues they grapple with is the emotional and mental toll of transphobia. Constant misgendering, lack of recognition, and targeted discrimination can lead to a devastating impact on their mental health. These students are more likely to experience heightened levels of anxiety and depression compared to their cisgender peers. The stress of navigating a hostile or invalidating environment every day can leave them feeling constantly on edge. Over time, this emotional strain can evolve into chronic mental health issues, including suicidal ideation. When schools fail to affirm transgender identities or address the discrimination they face, it contributes to a sense of invisibility and despair. For many, school, a place meant to be safe and supportive, becomes a battleground for their very existence. The academic consequences of such an environment are just as severe. Students cannot thrive academically when they're preoccupied with fear, rejection, or the trauma of being excluded. Transgender youth often miss school more frequently, whether to avoid bullying or to escape environments that feel threatening. Chronic absenteeism naturally results in falling behind in classwork, lower test scores, and decreased participation. Even the most intellectually gifted students may see their performance decline simply because they're emotionally overwhelmed. It's not a matter of ability, it's about survival. When a student is more concerned about whether they'll be harassed in the hallway than what they'll learn in math class, learning takes a back seat. The school's failure to create an inclusive and accepting space becomes a direct barrier to their academic success. In addition to emotional stress and academic disruption, transphobia in schools fosters severe social isolation. Transgender students are often singled out, left out, or worse, bullied relentlessly by peers, and sometimes even by teachers or staff. This social exclusion feeds into a vicious cycle. The more isolated they become, the less likely they are to find support, which further damages their sense of belonging and self-worth. Friendships are harder to form, trust becomes fragile, and the simple act of attending school can feel like walking into a war zone. The fear of physical or verbal attacks can be paralyzing. Over time, this isolation not only damages their confidence, but also their identity development, making them feel unsafe in their own skin. The trauma of bullying doesn't end with graduation. It can leave lifelong scars. When transgender students are constantly met with hostility instead of compassion, silence instead of affirmation, and ignorance instead of understanding, the damage runs deep. Emotional pain, academic loss, and social isolation are not abstract ideas. They are lived realities. Creating inclusive learning environment. Creating an inclusive learning environment is not just a progressive educational goal, it's a moral responsibility. Schools are meant to be safe havens for learning, curiosity, and self-expression, yet for many students, especially those who identify as transgender or non-binary, classrooms can feel like spaces of judgment, misunderstanding, or even fear. Challenging traditional gender norms is one of the first and most vital steps toward inclusivity. For far too long, society has imposed rigid gender roles: pink for girls, blue for boys, sports for boys, arts for girls. These stereotypes are deeply embedded in our schools, often in subtle ways, from classroom posters to the division of sports teams or seating arrangements. To foster a truly inclusive environment, educators must actively dismantle these outdated assumptions. They can start by using inclusive teaching materials that reflect diverse identities and encourage open conversations about gender. When students see themselves reflected in the curriculum and feel free to express their authentic selves, their confidence, participation, and well-being all improve. Respecting pronouns and chosen names is another fundamental aspect of building inclusivity. It may seem small to some, but calling a student by the name and pronouns they identify with is a powerful act of recognition and respect. It signals to the student that they are not just tolerated, but truly seen. Misgendering someone, whether intentional or accidental, can deeply impact their mental health and sense of belonging. Teachers and school staff must lead by example. Pronoun sharing during introductions, including pronouns in email signatures or on classroom boards, and correcting mistakes with sincerity can create a culture of respect. Moreover, educators should be prepared to correct students who deliberately misgender or mock their peers. This goes beyond being nice. It's about creating an environment where dignity and identity are non-negotiable. Equally important is the role of support systems within the school. Teachers, counselors, and administrators have a collective responsibility to ensure transgender students have access to the resources they need. This might include gender-neutral restrooms, safe spaces like LGBTQ+ support clubs, and clear anti-discrimination policies. Schools should also provide training for staff on gender inclusivity, helping them understand the issues students face and equipping them with strategies to address them effectively. In addition, counselors should be approachable allies, trained not only in academic guidance, but also in emotional support for queer and trans youth. No student should have to choose between their identity and their safety. Creating inclusive learning environments doesn't happen overnight, and it isn't the responsibility of one person. It requires a shift in mindset, a commitment to empathy, and a willingness to challenge norms. Advocating for systemic change. Transgender students face unique challenges within educational systems that often fail to protect their rights or affirm their identities. While progress has been made in some regions, transphobia in schools remains a serious issue, driven by outdated policies, lack of awareness, and insufficient training for educators. Advocating for systemic change begins with examining the current landscape of legislation. Some states and countries have implemented laws that prohibit discrimination based on gender identity, offering a critical foundation for student protection. However, these laws are often limited in scope or poorly enforced. Many schools still lack clear policies on restroom access, participation in sports, or protection from bullying and harassment. To create safer and more inclusive environments, legislation must go further. Mandating comprehensive anti-discrimination protections, establishing clear protocols for reporting incidents, and ensuring transgender students' rights are recognized and respected at every level. Policymakers must hear from constituents who demand these changes, especially those who directly experience or witness the harm caused by inaction. Alongside legislative advocacy, education reform is equally vital. Teachers and school staff are often the first line of defense for vulnerable students. Yet many receive little to no formal training on gender identity or the experiences of transgender youth. Without proper education, even well-meaning educators may inadvertently reinforce harmful stereotypes or fail to intervene in moments of crisis. Mandatory training on transgender issues, covering terminology, inclusive practices, and real-life scenarios, should be a standard part of professional development. Educators must learn how to support students who are transitioning, how to use correct pronouns, and how to recognize subtle forms of discrimination or exclusion. Equipping school personnel with this knowledge not only improves the daily experiences of transgender students, but also signals a broader institutional commitment to equity. Training should not be a one-time event, but part of an ongoing dialogue that evolves with societal understanding and the needs of the students. But policy and education alone are not enough. True systemic change also requires the active engagement of families and communities. Parents, guardians, and neighbors play a crucial role in shaping school culture and holding institutions accountable. When families speak up for inclusive policies, join school boards, or participate in community forums, they help normalize acceptance and empathy. Allies can also create support networks for transgender students, ensuring they never feel isolated or unseen. Engaging with local organizations, attending workshops, and listening to the voices of transgender individuals can help dismantle biases and foster understanding. Next steps: creating a positive change. As we come to the end of this video, I want to leave you with a sense of purpose and possibility. Creating a positive change doesn't require monumental gestures. Sometimes it begins with one small step, one bold conversation, one thoughtful decision. You have the power to make a difference, and it starts in your own community. Reach out to your local school boards and demand inclusive policies that reflect the diversity of all students. Push for the implementation of comprehensive anti-discrimination protections, gender-neutral restrooms, inclusive curriculums, and teacher training that supports the well-being of transgender and non-binary youth. Every voice counts, and yours could be the one that sparks the change a student so desperately needs. Support organizations that are already doing the work. Groups like GLSCN, the Trevor Project, Trans Lifeline, and PFLAG provide education, advocacy, and life-saving resources for students, families, and educators. Share their tools, donate if you can, and amplify their messages online and offline. Talk to your friends, family, and colleagues about what you've learned. Awareness is contagious, and understanding spreads when we allow ourselves to listen, learn, and grow. If you're a parent, guardian, or educator, know that your acceptance, support, and active allyship can be the difference between despair and hope for a transgender child. Let's build schools where every student feels seen, respected, and safe, where they can grow into who they are without fear or shame. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen if we commit, together, to challenging systems of exclusion and replacing them with policies of empathy, inclusion, and justice. Don't underestimate the ripple effect your actions can have. What starts in a single classroom or district can echo across the nation. Let's refuse to let hate win. Let's show our youth that they are loved, valid, and worthy of every opportunity this world has to offer. The road ahead may be long, but it is paved with hope. Every letter written, every voice raised, every action taken plants the seeds for a more just and equitable educational system, one where all students, regardless of their gender identity, can thrive. Keep showing up. Keep speaking out, because change doesn't come from silence. It comes from people like you who believe that everyone deserves a fair shot at being who they are, without apology. Let's be that generation that didn't back down when it mattered most. Let's build something better, for today's students and for all those yet to come. Thank you for watching, for caring, and most of all, for being part of this movement. The next step is yours. Let's make it count.